beer, it's good for you.
Hello and welcome to the video. Within this video I'll be sharing a full overview of Grainfather's new electric grain mill. My goal with this video is to answer as many of your questions in regards to this new grain mill and home milling as possible, and at the same time provide you with my own personal first impressions. This will start with a look at the benefits of home milling, moving on to an unboxing of the Grainfather electric grain mill and mounting board. During the unboxing I will take you through the features of the product in detail before showing and sharing my grain milling tests along with the results. I will then conclude with my first impression thoughts. Let's get started with the why. Firstly, as I see it, the most important reason to mill your own grain is so that you can fully control your grain bill with a grain crush that is consistent, so that you can dial in your brewing fully, knowing what to expect efficiency wise in advance. In doing this you can also ensure that your grain crush is ideal for your brewing system or method, as there is quite a variation of crush types. It is important to understand that your grain crush is vital to the results of the whole brew, as everything that comes after the mash is directly affected by the results of the mash. Even the most experienced of brewers will be working to a limitation when they are using grain that has been incorrectly crushed. Buying grain in bulk can also be an ideal way of saving money, but it should be pointed out that this may not be ideal for everyone's situation with all grain types. Grain needs to be carefully stored and has a limited life cycle. For some brewers this means just buying base malts in bulk, but naturally this does make for a saving even on its own. Let's now take a look at this product and what you should expect in the box. As you can see, I also have the mounting board, which is an optional extra. Let's start by looking into the main box. Firstly, it was stated on the box that instructions should be downloaded at Grainfather's website, which is great if you care about the planet you live on, but as I understand it by law, some written safety instructions need to accompany electrical products, so here they are. Also supplied is a power cable as well as some mounting screws. Also supplied is this hopper, which is certainly smaller than expected, but prejudgments here can lead to incorrect conclusions. More on this later. And lastly, here is the mill itself. The construction here feels very sturdy and well put together. I have not dropped it yet, but I suspect that it could take some punishment. The overall impression here is that this is of very good quality and built to last. Let's run by some key areas. Firstly, in my opinion, one of the best features on offer here is the ability to set a gap setting in seconds. This allows you to quickly adjust to different grain types. Regular mills take considerably more time and effort to adjust, and the inclusion of this feature certainly comes with a big sigh of relief from me. I guess that most of us that have an existing grain mill choose just one crush setting for the entire grain bill, even when I'm sure many of us realise that this is not ideal for the best crush possible. So we can move in on this track faster, Grainfather have set a list of guidelines for different types of grain to ensure a great starting point. I suspect that these will be spot on for most people, but naturally grain does vary across the world. The Grainfather mill has 10 different gap settings from 0.8 to 2mm, which is certainly enough to cover everything you would ever want to be milling. We will look further at this when I show you my crushing test later on in this video. Then we have the milling components and design. This starts with 400 watts of power that drive two hardened stainless steel rollers with a flute design that is very similar to the setup found on commercial grain mills. This design should certainly improve the quality of grain crush compared to a regular homebrew mill roller system. Ideally with milling you want to crack the husk, not destroy it, which will lead to too fine a grain crush and potential problems. This mill's design cracks the husk from front to back in an even fashion. This is backed up by this gated grain feeder. Let's take a closer look at this now. This feeder is designed to control the flow of grain to avoid jamming and crush issues that can be found on regular mills. Here is some video footage showing this feeding action in progress. Due to the way this works, I have also noticed that it reduces the amount of flour dust in the air, making the milling process less messy. I would still strongly suggest that you mill outside or within a well-ventilated area for your own health though. Better safe than sorry. Another useful feature is that this grain mill has its own electric mechanism that controls speed with settings designed for milling with 6 levels. Grainfather recommend a speed setting of 4 for their own all-in-one systems, which is sure to suit similar equipment. I suspect that speed setting of 6 will be useful for a more finer grain crush that is designed by brew-in-a-bag brewers. Lower speeds than 4 I suspect will be very useful for more problematic grain, like wheat for example. Naturally, most of us are used to controlling milling speed using a drill. Having this built in without the need for a drill is certainly very useful. It also has to be mentioned that unlike most grain mills, this one is very compact. Here is a size comparison of my Monster Mill 3 Pro compared to the Grainfather electric grain mill. The Grainfather mill is smaller in every single way, as you can see, and naturally the Monster Mill requires a suitable drill for operation as well. This mill is very suited to small shelf storage, with the hopper and mounting board being very fast to remove. More on this is coming next. Here is the mounting board, which is an optional purchase, though I suspect most people will buy the Grainfather mill with it. This is made from bamboo and has a pre-cut opening which measures 48 by 112 mm. I find this to be of good quality and certainly an advancement on some of the cheaper boards out there. The Grainfather mill is supplied with mounting screws, as you probably remember, but in actual fact these are not intended to be used with the Grainfather mounting board. Rather, they are intended for mounting the mill to a workbench or another type of mounting board. Grainfather's mounting board does not require the mill to be screwed down, and my testing so far confirms that the weight of the mill is perfectly sufficient. This is great as it allows much more flexible storage of the mill and its different components. I am now going to share with you some quick grain milling tests, starting with Malt, which is what I am filling the hopper with right now. And here is the milling. Firstly, the footage you see here has been increased in speed as to not waste your time, but the total milling time taken is 32 seconds for 1 kilo of Malt. This milling was performed at a speed setting of 4 and a gap setting of 5, so on this basis of gradually feeding this hopper with 5 kilos of Malt, then your total milling time is going to be less than 3 minutes. After a little shake, it is time to inspect the grain crush. I am pleased with what I see here. You can see that we have a reasonable level of flour, but also a lot of cracked but not destroyed grain husks. This is exactly what I want to see, as the husks provide a large advantage in filtration during the mash. Without these husks, things can get very gummy and a thick grain bed can be developed, which is the total opposite of what is desired for brewing, as it causes grain compaction, leading to partially or fully stuck mashes and sparges. This is caused simply because there are limited or few avenues for liquid to pass through. So in summary, a speed setting of 4 with a gap setting of 5 worked very nicely here for this Malt. Another popular base malt is Munich, so here I am loading and then milling it. As this is simply a test, I didn't use a huge amount here, but I did keep the speed setting at 4 and the gap setting at 5 as per Grainfather's instructions. Here is the end result after the shake, which I decided not to subject you to twice. This is consistent with the results found with the Malt and for sure the sort of crush that we are looking for. Let's now move on to carapils. In Grainfather's gap setting advice, they suggest a gap setting of 4 for caramel and crystal malts, so I changed the gap setting to 4 and here goes. Again, this footage was sped up, but the milling time was very similar to the Paler Munich malts. Once again, I was very pleased to see the end result here. It is consistent with exactly what I want to see in my grain crush. In fact, this is all I saw when using Grainfather's suggested gap settings until I reached wheat malt. I have to say that when I saw Grainfather recommending a gap setting of 4 for wheat, I figured this could spell for some trouble. Wheat malt can certainly vary an awful lot in terms of its hardness and thus its ease of milling. Naturally, this is a huskless grain, so the same rules do not apply as we have spoken about so far. There is a tendency to mill wheat at a finer setting for some compared to base malts, but for some types this will simply not work and it can cause mash and sparge issues because it is too smashed. When I switched the mill on for this one, the milling went very slowly and the noise level doubled in volume at least. Clearly something was wrong, so I switched the mill off and had a look at the grain. From the small selection of example crush, I could see that it was literally smashed to pieces and would be problematic. Clearly gap setting 4 was not going to work for this particular wheat malt. I then tried gap setting 5 and whilst it was better, it was still jamming some. What you see here is actually gap setting 6, which is feeding through nicely. Naturally, another option could have been trying gap setting 5 at a faster running speed, which I did not try, but it could have come next. However, once I saw the quality of the crush at 6, I was more than happy. Yes, it took a little time to get here, but nothing like the time I would have spent troubleshooting the gap on a regular grain mill, that is for sure. So far I have spent just over 2 hours milling grain with this mill, so as such I cannot fairly say that I have tested it enough to form a final opinion about it. However, I have tested it with a much wider range of grains than those that I have presented in this video, and at a speed setting of 4 it did a great job until I reached the wheat malt as shown. Naturally this was a temporary issue though, and a good gap setting was found quickly. Speed certainly seems to be a theme with this mill, and even a grain bill of 8 kilos with 2 to 3 different gap settings should not take the user more than 5 to 6 minutes if they continually feed the hopper as intended. Gradually topping up the grain is not exactly hard work and felt oddly satisfying. It also occurred to me that I really did not miss sitting there with a drill trying to keep the same slow and steady pace to keep my grain bill on point and to avoid jams. Let me know what you think in the comments section of this video. I do hope that you found this video useful, informative and interesting. If so, why not consider liking and subscribing? For further support you can join the channel's Facebook group, and if you would like to support the channel then check out the channel's merchandise store, as all profits go back into the channel. Until next time, happy brewing!